The disappearance of a young girl named Candy Rogers, who was only 9 years old at the time, caused widespread panic in the Spokane community in March of 1959. The subsequent 16 days of search activity were marked by an outpouring of support and participation from the local community. When her body was found in a wooded region in the northwest part of Spokane County, optimism and activism gave way to despair and fear. She had been raped before her death, which was caused by being strangled with a piece of her own clothing. The inquiry that followed would continue to linger in the minds of family members, detectives, and people of the community for decades to come. On March 6, 1959, Candy Rogers was outside her home in the west central section of Spokane, where she resided, selling campfire mints. When evening fell and she still hadn't returned, her relatives started to get worried about her safety. This anxiety increased as the evening progressed without any sign of Candy, and soon every available law enforcement officer, in addition to residents and other groups, participated in the hunt for her. The detectives had very little to go on because there were no cell phones, GPS devices, or security cameras available at the time. Soon after, scattered along Pettit Drive, in the direction ostensibly leading away from West Central, were found boxes of campfire mints that were thought to be the same ones that Candy was selling. The mints were the only clue, albeit it wasn't a particularly strong one, as to where Candy had gone. Following Candy's disappearance, and in the hours and days that followed, the community came together in an effort to find her. At the location that is now occupied by the T.J. Meenock Bridge and the Pettit Drive intersection, there was once a command post. There were approximately 1,200 people searching the region, however they were unsuccessful in their efforts. During the search, assistance was provided by a variety of organizations, one of which was the United States Air Force. The Air Force dispatched a helicopter crew to provide an aerial perspective of the region being searched for the missing person. Tragically, a day after Candy went missing, a Sikorsky H-19 helicopter belonging to the United States Air Force that was participating in the search fell into the Spokane River after colliding with high-tension power cables. 3 people lost their lives in the accident: Airman Marlis D. Ray, SS Gent William A. McDonnell, and Lieutenant Kenneth G. Fautek. 2 members of the team managed to survive. The weeks that followed Candy's disappearance were filled with ongoing searches and investigations. On the 21st of March in 1959, 2 pilots from Fairchild were out hunting in a wooded area off of Old Trails Road, which was approximately 7 miles from Candy's house. They were in the woods when they came across a pair of shoes for a female. As soon as they got back to the base, they didn't stop talking about what they had found, and they pondered whether or not the shoes had anything to do with the hunt for Candy. They then reported what they had discovered, and as soon as it was light the following morning, a search party arrived at the location. After only a few minutes of searching, the body of Candy was found buried behind a thin layer of brush and pine needles. The hunt was only just beginning. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, investigators combed through thousands of tips and leads, but none of them ever led them to a suspect who could be considered viable. In 1959, there was no such thing as a registered sexual offender program. Nonetheless, people with criminal records that were comparable were contacted. Although the police had a few potential suspects in mind, they were unable to gather sufficient evidence to make an arrest. The number of months went into years, and despite their frustration and determination, the detectives continued to work on the case even though they kept hitting brick walls. As the years went by, the investigation of what is now considered a cold case was passed on from retiring police officers to the subsequent generation of investigators. The personnel who were leaving their positions made impassioned pleas to their successors, asking them to continue looking for answers in the case of Candy. When 1959 rolled around, the possibilities of technology and forensic testing were nearly unrecognizable compared to what they are today. Even while the concept of DNA has been accepted as part of the scientific community, it will not be used to solve crimes for many decades to come. It is a credit to the diligence of investigators in 1959 that evidence was maintained in such a manner that DNA could be extrapolated 62 years later. Given that there is no way to anticipate the future of trace evidence and the sensitivity of subsequent testing processes, it is a testament to the diligence of investigators in 1959 that DNA could be extrapolated. At the beginning of the year 2021, investigators from the SPD and WSP crime lab specialists became aware of a cutting-edge DNA testing procedure made available by a facility located in the state of Texas. That laboratory was given a sample of the sperm that was obtained by collecting it from Candy's clothing. After entering the sample into a genealogical database, the researchers were able to reduce the pool of probable matches down to 3 brothers. John Ray Hoff, who was the only one of the 3 brothers to have children of his own, was listed as one of the potential partners in the study. The investigators got a new piece of information, but there was still a lot of work to be done. When investigators contacted the daughter of John Ray Hoff, she immediately dropped everything and went to meet with the detectives after learning about the nature of the investigation. An analysis was performed on a DNA sample that was provided by Hoff's daughter. According to the findings, the probability that Hoff's daughter's DNA is related to the discovered specimen is 2.9 million times higher than the probability that it is related to the general population. The investigators now have substantial evidence that pointed in the direction of Hoff being the perpetrator. Nonetheless, they were confronted with a challenging question: how certain is certain enough? Due to the fact that Hoff had passed away, there would be no possibility of a criminal trial or an adversarial process in which both sides submit their evidence. This inquiry would be the source of all of the information obtained, and the detectives came to the conclusion that they had an obligation to be as certain as is humanly possible. In light of the fact that there were reasons to believe that John Ray Hoff was responsible for the crime, the investigators from the SPD applied for and were given a warrant that gave them permission to exhume Hoff's remains and gather DNA samples. A probability threshold indicated that it was 25 quintillion, 18 zeros, times more likely that the sample came from John Ray Hoff than from an unrelated person chosen at random from the general population. The result demonstrated a match between John Ray Hoff and the semen specimen retrieved from Candy. The findings of the scientific investigation demonstrated beyond a reasonable doubt that the DNA sample taken from Candy's clothing belonged to John Ray Hoff. The findings from the DNA testing, along with other evidence, led the detectives to the conclusion that John Ray Hoff was the person responsible for the rape and murder of Candy Rogers, who was 9 years old at the time. In the year that he committed the murder, John Ray Hoff was 20 years old. He was born and raised in Spokane, where he lived in the West Central neighborhood, only about a mile away from Candy. At the age of 17, he enlisted in the Army and was eventually assigned to missile sites in the area around Fairchild AFB. Hoff was found guilty of assault in the 2nd degree with the intent to rob in 1961, 2 years after Candy had been brutally killed. During that particular instance, Hoff was seen confronting a woman, forcibly removing the victim's clothing, tying her up utilizing her own clothing, and then strangling her before fleeing the scene. The victim was able to make a full recovery, and Hoff was sentenced to serve 6 months in jail for the incident. Hoff was labeled a deserter by the Army and given his discharge after being found guilty of the charges against him. After being kicked out of the military, he got a job as a door-to-door salesman and also worked at a lumber yard for a while. Hoff took his own life in the year 1970, when he was 31 years old. For decades after its conclusion, the case continued to have an impact on both the department and the community. Sergeant Zach Stormont had this response when he was asked to provide an estimate of the number of hours that had been spent researching Candy's case. "This isn't measured in hours. This is measured in careers. It took the patience of generations of detectives, the progress of technology, and the dedication of an entire community before the mystery of Candy Rogers' gruesome murder was ultimately solved. After 62 years, there is now some sense of resolution to the situation. Story tell another way. With Candy Rogers' killer finally identified, the 9-year-old's relatives unpacked new layers to a grim family legacy. Now, multiple members of Candace Candy Elaine Rogers' family experienced a flood of emotions and recollections when the 62-year-old cold case murder of 9-year-old Candace was finally solved by detectives in Spokane. Candy's father, Carl, took his own life 4 years after Candy disappeared. Her mother, Elaine, a school teacher, lived till 2006, never knowing who killed her daughter. Candy Rogers was an only child, and her parents have since passed away. During the initial days of the search for Rogers, a helicopter crashed and 3 airmen died. Another relative, a 19-year-old student at Gonzaga University, cited the case's reliance on DNA research as a major factor in convincing her to pursue a job in forensic science. DNA evidence implicated John Ray Hoff, who had not been a suspect in Rogers' murder until that year, in her kidnapping, rape, and murder, the Spokane Police Department revealed in November. Rogers was last seen on the evening of March 6, 1959, in west-central Spokane, where she was selling mints for the Camp Fire Girls. Rogers' corpse was discovered 16 days later in a mound of pine needles and brush about 130 feet off Old Trails Road, about 3.2 miles northwest of Spokane Falls Community College. Spokane Police Chief Craig Meidel said upon the revelation of Hoff's name, "We have a kidnapping of an innocent 9-year-old who was brutally and violently assaulted and murdered. A young child of 9 who knew nothing of wickedness. The assassination of a loved one is one of the most devastating acts that can be committed against a person's family." Hoff and his family resided next door to Karen Jo Tierney's parents and 2 elder siblings on West Rosewood Avenue in northwest Spokane for about 1.5 years before Hoff, then 31 years old, took his own life in 1970. Rogers was a relative of Tierney's mother, Judy Geisbush Tierney. Tierney stated that they had no idea Hoff was the murderer until the November discovery in the cold case. Until her passing in 2015, her mother resided in the same Rosewood home. Tierney's father has moved in with her now. She claimed that her folks were unfamiliar with Hoff. Tierney mentioned that Hoff's wife wore a lot of makeup, and that her brother still talks about the chemical burn he got on his face while working in a Spokane meat packaging factory. Tierney claims that in 1970, Hoff's wife screamed that he had a gun and fled out of the home. Tierney claimed that her mother had gathered her children inside after finding them playing outside. Tierney claimed that after Hoff had allegedly shot himself in the entrance to his home, she was informed that her mother had assisted in the aftermath of Hoff's death. Tierney stated that her mother had a big scrapbook dedicated to Rogers' case media clippings. John Geisbush, Rogers' eldest cousin and Judy Tierney's sibling, recalled that his sister frequently displayed a scrapbook dedicated to Rogers at their Rosewood Avenue house. He claimed that he and his wife had shown the album to Hoff. The individual who rubbed the guy's nose in it did not even realize it was happening, Geisbush said, and perhaps that did add to the guy's stress. The night Rogers went missing, Rogers' mother called his grandmother to let her know. "It kind of shook us a little bit," Geisbush admitted. According to Geisbush, they were out searching for 4 or 5 hours in the middle of the night near Fort George Wright. A few snowflakes had fallen, so he searched for tracks. The hunt that night, he said, was unguided and free-for-all among the participants. According to Geisbush, he does not believe Rogers is deceased and instead thinks she got disoriented or something, saying, "I was extremely hopeful," he elaborated. "I was, in fact." 9 Mile Falls resident and now 76-year-old Poss said she was at a Camp Fire Girls overnight in Spokane the night Rogers vanished. Poss, who was 13 at the time, recalled that she had a hard time sleeping that night out of concern for her relative. In the days that followed, the search for Rogers proceeded. For the next 2 weeks, all Poss could speak about was Candy. Poss claimed she was naive and did not worry that anything awful had happened to Rogers in the over 2 weeks she was gone. She, like Geisbush, thought she must have gotten confused or fallen and injured herself. According to Poss, her mother informed her that Rogers had been located as she was leaving the house for worship. Poss thought she was still living. Her mother didn't tell her that Rogers had died until she got back from church. It's just not possible for something like that to happen to you, and if it ever has, it's occurred in other cities with other individuals. Geisbush claimed he couldn't recall whether or not he was informed instantly of the details surrounding her demise. "I can't even begin to imagine what Candy went through," Geisbush said. "She reminded me of the kindest, happiest, and most giggling 9 or 10-year-olds. Geisbush claimed he was unaware of who Hoff was. He described the resolution of the matter as really uplifting. Can you believe that 62 years after a horrible crime was committed, authorities in Spokane, Washington are still trying to track down the perpetrator? That we won't give up looking for it until we do is encouraging." When Poss heard the news in November that Hoff had been charged with Rogers' murder, she was stunned. It triggered a flood of horrible memories, Poss said. She said that she believed that despite their best efforts, the dead case would never be solved. Poss claimed she was a longtime member of Camp Fire Girls, where Rogers was frequently discussed. "I thought about it every time I had a confectionery sale," she said. Poss said her daughter phoned around after hearing the news, and within 15 minutes, Sergeant Zach Stormont of the Spokane Police Department's Major Crimes Unit called to profusely apologize to her and the rest of the family for their discovery of Rogers' killer via the media. She claimed that Stormont had told her he was unaware of her existence and had spent over 2 hours at her home that day explaining the situation to her and her family. She remarked, "It's been an emotional journey, a continuation of the tragic family history." The birth of Rogers' third relative, Emily Evers, occurred 43 years after his passing. The Gonzaga biology major, however, claims that Evers' grandmother, Poss, told her several times about Rogers' tale as a caution to her and her brothers. She felt better after hearing that Rogers' murderer had been caught. It was also motivational. The story of Candy's case and how it was solved entirely through DNA analysis piqued Evers' interest in forensic science, he said. On the 17th of December, Evers visited the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab in Cheney, where he encountered forensic chemist Brittany Wright. 3 months earlier, Wright had determined that DNA samples taken from Hoff and Rogers' garments were genetically identical. "I can't imagine how much hard work and dedication she put into solving this to help not just my family but everyone else," Evers said of the detective. "A lot of motivation can be drawn from it." While Evers is leaning towards a future as a forensic chemist, she is still on the fence and has expressed an interest in interning at the Cheney lab. She finished secondary school when she was 16 years old, is now a junior at Gonzaga, and is participating in the university's Army ROTC program for the first time this term. After 26 years of duty, her father retired as a colonel in the United States Army. She claimed that she looked forward to scientific classes throughout her education. When asked about her time spent in laboratories during her undergraduate years, she recalled, "I would put in my earbuds, listen to music, and just have the time of my life in the lab. I know I want to use my skills and abilities in science to help other people, and that's why I know I want to pursue something in biology. It's something I'm so passionate about and have just always enjoyed," she said. Evers has stated that she intends to incorporate her family's value of providing for others into her future profession. "We all just really care about the community and are very protective over our loved ones and just have a really strong sense of loyalty and service," Evers said. "Spokane is just something that I've grown up caring about, and everything in my family has grown up caring about, and I don't want to see anybody else harmed. I believe that's kind of what pulls me to biological forensics and DNA analysis." One of the most heartbreaking aspects of Candy's situation is the knowledge that the individual responsible for her injuries could have caused similar harm to others. Poss has expressed a desire to establish a grant at Gonzaga University in honor of Rogers. She said that a science major or someone interested in a forensic science job would be the perfect recipient. Poss said her daughter is currently in talks with the Spokane Parks Department about erecting a memorial to Rogers at the West Central Community Center. "I don't want her forgotten now that it's over," Poss said. The Candy Rogers case was a mysterious cold case that began in 2002 when a young woman named Candy Rogers went missing from her home in California. Despite an extensive search and investigation, the case went cold and remained unsolved for over 2 decades. Friday, November 19, 2021 at 12:01 p.m. Unrelenting determination coupled with advancing technology helped solve one of Spokane's most heinous and haunting crimes, the rape and murder of a 9-year-old girl 62 years ago. A breakthrough was made when an anonymous tip led the authorities to a location where they found Candy's body. After months of investigation, the killer was identified and arrested, providing closure for Candy's family and friends. The solving of the Candy Rogers case also provided closure to Candy's family and friends, who had been searching for answers for over 2 decades. It highlighted the importance of solving cold cases, not just for the justice system, but for the families and loved ones of the victims. The Candy Rogers case serves as an inspiration and a reminder to investigators that they should never give up on a case, no matter how long it has gone unsolved. It shows that with the right resources, new leads and technologies, and perseverance, even the most challenging cold cases can be solved, bringing justice and closure to the victims and their families. The case's resolution demonstrated the importance of persistence and the use of technology in solving cold cases. It also showed the value of anonymous tips and the role they can play in breaking open a case. While the resolution of the Candy Rogers case was a positive outcome, it also serves as a reminder of the tragedy and loss that the victim and her loved ones experienced. The case's resolution does not change the fact that a young woman's life was taken, but it provides a sense of closure and accountability for those responsible. The resolution of the Candy Rogers case also emphasizes the importance of not giving up on cold cases and the value of continued investigation and technological advancements. Hopefully, the successful resolution of this case will inspire and motivate investigators to continue pursuing justice for other cold cases, providing answers and closure to the families and loved ones of victims. The story of the Candy Rogers case is both heartbreaking and inspiring. After decades of searching for answers, the mysterious hook has finally been revealed, bringing closure to this tragic tale. If you were moved by this story, please consider subscribing to our channel for more emotional and compelling true crime stories. By leaving a like and commenting below, you can show your support and help us spread the word about the importance of solving cold cases. Don't forget to share this video with your loved ones to raise awareness and support for those who have lost someone they care about. Together, we can make a difference and honor the memory of those who have been affected by unsolved cases.